Progressive firebrand Alexandria Ocasio Cortez won her primary election in a landslide, proving the Democratic Party has lost control. They are now under the control of the progressive far left and, dare I say, the outrage mobs. The people that are roaming the streets, destroying statues and rioting throughout various cities in this country are now in control of the Democratic Party. And I know it sounds a bit hyperbolic to say, but it's true. All you need do is look at Ocasio Cortez's Twitter feed, and you can see that while her opinions are mostly surface level and generic, it's entirely in support of those who are tearing down statues. But the statues being torn down aren't just Confederates, they're anybody. Ulysses S. Grant and abolitionist statues are being torn down. AOC represents this mob to our federal government, and she's won. And it's not just her. Eliot Engel, who was propped up by the Democratic establishment, also lost to a progressive. The progressives are winning. Now, what does this mean for the future? I think it shows that there's a conflict looming, to say the least, but it also shows, and I believe it's fair to say, the progressives are winning across the board. It may be that the conservatives really do just lose everything. Maybe there will be no great second civil war, whatever you want to call it, because the Republicans just can't muster a defense. They weren't able to stop AOC. Michelle Caruso Cabrera, the centrist Democrat who was propped up by Wall Street Republicans and Democrat elites alike, could not stop AOC. This could show us that there is a massive progressive push in this country, and the reason why no one is standing up to these people tearing down statues and, yes, beating the crap out of a Democratic state senator in Wisconsin is because they like it. Maybe that's the real reason why it seems like no one is standing up. You know, right now, there's a video of me giving this rant about you needing to stand up to defend your job, to defend your culture, your constitution, and people won't do it. How about a scarier alternative? Nobody wants to do it because people like AOC, because she will win. Now, I don't think that's entirely fair. It's important to point out that New York 14 was a closed primary. At least that's my understanding, meaning Republicans couldn't actually vote in it. And we may see something much, much more different in November. Perhaps what we're really seeing is the culture war. The reason she won, AOC, is because the Democrats are aligned with the culture, with the far left culture war. But it doesn't mean anything about regular Americans who couldn't vote if they weren't registered Democrats. Perhaps come November, Donald Trump wins in a landslide, because consider this. We were told by the media, not just Fox News, we were told by mainstream media as well, that people really don't like Ocasio-Cortez. It was Axios, for instance, that wrote that approval for AOC is in the gutter, yet she still won. Now, what does that mean for the polls and Donald Trump? This could suggest that while the media keeps telling us over and over again, everybody hates Donald Trump, he still wins. The New York Times put out a story arguing in defense of their polling methods and why it's correct that Joe Biden has a 14-point lead over Trump. And maybe they still just don't consider the effect of the culture war. And that's why the Democratic Party cannot win. So AOC represents something different, populists. And maybe her victory actually proves Joe Biden can't win either. Maybe it doesn't matter if they're left or right so long as they are not the elitists like Joe Biden. I suppose we'll see, but let's read these stories. And I want to show you what's going on. What I really fear in all this is that at the very least, whether or not you want to talk about Trump winning, the mob has taken over the Democratic Party. Who will stop them if the Democrats are just in alignment with the chaos and the destruction, with Andrew Cuomo praising the destruction of abolitionist statues? Why? Because he's ignorant. I'm sure he thinks they're Confederate statues. No, they're tearing down everything. They want to tear down Lincoln now. No, I'm not kidding either. Let's read the story. Before we get started, however, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's many ways you can give. There is a P.O. box if you would like to send some things. But the best thing you can do is just share this video, because I am competing with the mainstream media, and I am but a humble independent YouTuber. I am not some massive corporate entity. I'm not even like one of these smaller media entities that actually have a brand. I'm just me. So if you like what I do, sharing really helps. If you just want to watch, then click the like button, subscribe, notification bell. Let's read the story. AOC beats Democratic challenger in her New York primary and hits out at critics who said her previous election was an accident or a fluke. They say the 30-year-old progressive firebrand, better known as AOC, ran far ahead of former CNBC television anchor Michelle Caruso Cabrera in New York's 14th district. Caruso Cabrera had campaigned as a more moderate replacement to the Democratic Socialist lawmaker. She tweeted, "When I won in 2018, many dismissed our victory as a fluke. Our win was treated as an aberration, or because my opponent didn't try. So from the start, tonight's race was important to me. Tonight, we are proving that the people's movement in New York isn't an accident. It's a mandate." I don't agree. I really, really don't. I still believe you can argue AOC's victory was a fluke. Now, I know the progressives are going to be like, Tim's just biased. Perhaps that's the reason why. But listen, let me give you a logical reason as to why I think so. She won with around 16 or 17,000 primary votes in 2018. She was propped up by a bunch of progressive channels, and that's really not that many people to win in a primary. It's a technique called primarying. You have 706,000 people in this district, and you got a fraction, tiny fraction of the actual voting body. So not a whole lot of people. Today, she was able to, today as in historically today, but yesterday, she was able to muster 27,000, I believe it's 27,103 votes. 103, giving her 72.6% of the total votes. This is a district of 706,000 people. Take a look, 706,440. This is still extreme minority representation. She's now going to win with, I believe, like 150,000 or so votes in the general. That's how many people end up voting, just because they always vote Democrats, a D+29 district. Yes, I'm sorry. It was a fluke, and it's still a fluke. But it doesn't matter. That's the wrong argument. Right now, I believe AOC won right now because she's a celebrity with 7.4 million followers. But think about it. With 7.4 million followers as the most famous Democrat, you could only get a tiny fraction of your district. Now, to be fair, the entire district isn't registered Democrat. Keep that in mind, which means I believe the actual number is in the hundreds of thousands. So it still is a relatively small amount of people. And this is a lot for whether or not the Democratic establishment could muster any of this. But she's a celebrity, man. Take that into consideration. I believe it was a fluke. It was because a bunch of progressives lost. And we've seen it over and over again. Moderates win. Even Vox.com admitted it was moderates who won. Donald Trump ran as a moderate, and he won. That's from Matthew Iglesias of the left-wing Vox.com. Today, with celebrity power and a national coalition, yes, AOC still won. But it doesn't matter if it's a fluke. Throw it all out the window. I don't care if it's a fluke or not. She won. She found a way in. It worked, and she used her celebrity status to win. I think this, in a lot of ways, is good news for Trump because she's a bombastic celebrity candidate who got very little done. Apparently, the media says everybody hates her, and she still won. Compare that to Trump. The media says he is a bombastic celebrity personality who got very little done, and everyone hates him. I think if we're dealing with culture war issues here, Trump is predicted to win. But Trump is much more important. So maybe not. You could also argue that it's a leftward lurch, that Trump will lose because people would rather have a progressive given the opportunity. But we'll see. I'm curious, what will happen in the general election? Will moderate Democrat types, people who aren't registered, turn on AOC? Will we see 160,000 for the Republican candidate? I'm not entirely convinced, but this is a primary and there is too much we don't understand. But let me just put it very, very bluntly. Congratulations to AOC and the progressive left. You've done it. You've won. Look, we can make every argument we want. We can argue that there's this reason and that reason why Trump is going to win. There's this reason. Doesn't matter. The data right now shows AOC did it. The progressives are rising and the Democratic establishment could not stop them. There you go. The Democratic establishment is now under the boot of the mob and people like AOC, and they're winning. You don't want to accept it. I know people don't want to accept it. But look at this. Wall Street was dumping money into Michelle Caruso Cabrera. They could not stop the mob. Governor Andrew Cuomo, he's figured out exactly where which side. I'll keep the analogy simple. He's decided where to place his chips. Cuomo and de Blasio support Natural History Museum removal of Roosevelt statue. These are the people who would want to destroy our history, and they are cheering for it because AOC says so. Bend the knee. If you don't, you're out. And this is what we can expect. Over at the Washington Times, Andrew Cuomo defends destruction of U.S. monuments. It's a healthy expression. You see what's happening? Statues are being torn down. A Wisconsin state senator was attacked by protesters in Madison. He was brutally beaten and apparently locked in his office, kicked in the head, left with a black eye. Because you're done. The mob owns you now. Get on your knees, Cuomo, and beg. And they're doing it. De Blasio and Cuomo are giving in to all of the demands of these people. This is your Democratic Party. The establishment couldn't hold them back. Too many Americans just don't care. Or maybe the reality is many Americans agree with the mob. They want to see it. Maybe these people who vote Democrat, they like seeing their politicians get beaten up for not doing their job properly. Now, my personal bias says I don't believe it. I believe the mob on the left is growing and they're powerful. But I think what we're seeing is a fact that the Democratic Party is disaffected. People like me, for instance, left a long time ago. I don't think they care. But when it comes to the general election, things may change. The outrage, the riots may shock and scare people. And you may see that even though AOC won in a landslide, man, she thinks that because she's in a D+30 district, she can't lose. What did we see in the UK on December 13th? Areas that hadn't voted conservative in nearly 100 years flipped. So you would be, I'll say this to the progressives, again, congratulations on winning. You've done it, right? There's no excuse. You can make all the excuses in the book. But I will tell you right now, if you think you've still secured it in these uncertain times, you would be mistaken. Do not let hubris bring you down. And that means, even though we're seeing these progressive victories, people like Eliot Engel being defeated by a progressive endorsed by AOC, this doesn't mean anything. The front runner in one of these districts was a guy named Ruben Diaz, who was he was polled to win. He did not win. Someone else did. But this guy's a cowboy hat wearing pro-Trump Democrat. What happens then if this guy can muster that much support? He loses a primary. Why? Because Democratic activists, the most active base of the Democratic Party, are the ones who vote in the primaries. What does that mean for everybody else who really liked the guy in the general election? Perhaps regular people aren't paying attention. Perhaps they just go and vote Democrat, or perhaps many of them really just like the progressive push. But maybe all of the Republicans who do live in these districts, even though they're in a serious minority, only around 20%, if they all came out and voted, they would win. That's the crazy thing. Believe it or not, while it may seem like shooting for the moon, extremely unlikely, a Republican could still beat Ocasio Cortez. I really do think so. What you got to understand is a lot of these older voters are conservative, but they're not the activist base. Maybe when it comes time to vote, they don't know or care about the primaries. Maybe many of these people they're not activists. But let me point this out. If AOC was able to muster a strong activist outpouring to vote for her, what does that say about the Republican activists? What does that say about Republican activation? Is it possible because of the riots, Republicans now say, I am going out and voting? And if they all did, in AOC's district, she would lose, even though it's D+29. That would be incredible. Now, I find it absolutely fascinating that they just updated right now 27,460 votes. It's absolutely fascinating how little it takes. Let's talk about what this means for Trump and what this means for the future. Ilhan Omar tweeted, in 2016, when I ran against a 44-year incumbent, people told me saying Black Lives Matter was wrong messaging and I would lose. Today, not only did I win that race, but everyone is falling over. Today, not only did I win that race, but everyone is falling over themselves to say Black Lives Matter. We speak to our values, not their messaging. That's right. Statues are being ripped apart. Abolitionist statues in Wisconsin. Democrats being beaten to a pulp. I'm not exaggerating. A Democratic politician was beaten to a pulp. And she's saying that's what people want. Perhaps they do. then I would tell you this, America. If you find yourself as a moderate, slightly left-leaning Democrat who wants peace, wants a better future for your kids, you've lost. To all the people saying, I can't speak up, I've got to feed my kids, you've already lost your children's future. I mean, for real, think about it. If they can tear down statues of Ulysses S. Grant, you know they're not doing it because of some kind of, anger at the Confederacy. They're doing it to strip you of your history and your culture, because the next move they make is to suspend civil rights. I'm not exaggerating. In California, the Democrats voted to repeal the civil rights provision from their constitution. It said the state shall not discriminate on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, national origin in public housing, employment, and and contracting. Now, who knows how far that goes, but they voted so far on it. Next, it goes to the Senate. If California is a few years ahead of us, then consider the future your children will have. I think it's going to be a bad one. And I think if you refuse to stand up, it won't matter how much money you have to buy your kids food, because your kids won't have a future anyway. AOC tweeted, people really need to ask themselves why their communities chose to erect statues to slaveholders instead of abolitionists. It actually is a really good question. But if you look at AOC's Twitter history, she does these surface level tweets that kind of support the mob without being overt about it. Why? Well, because people don't like mob violence. So she can press the progressive issues while still being somewhat politically correct in the sense that she's not supporting overt violence. But the interesting thing about this is that while she does bring up a good point, why did they do it? Why? It doesn't matter, because they're tearing down the abolitionists in Wisconsin. Again, I'm not exaggerating. When protests in Madison turned violent, they actually tore down a statue to a colonel who was an anti-slavery activist who was a militiaman targeting slave catchers. So whether or not the American people support it isn't so much the point. I think obviously most Americans are probably opposed to it, but enough support it. That's the issue. Whether or not you think AOC's victory was a fluke isn't the point. The fact is, she won. She has the power. She has the reins. And the Democrats are going to bend the knee to her. Hundreds of National Guard troops mobilized to protect D.C. monuments amid protests. Trump is the president of the United States. And what has he been able to do? He's been able to protect his one little federal district. Wow. The Democratic governors are allowing this to happen. They're getting the Democrat literally got beaten up. And what has Trump been able to do about it? Nothing. What have the Republicans said about it? Well, Tom Cotton spoke out. Other than that, nothing. Why? Do the Republicans seem to think that if they stand back and let the fires burn, then people will be like, oh no, everything's going really, really bad. I'm scared. I must vote Republican. Or will people say, they have burned my city to the ground and Trump did nothing? I have no idea. It could go either way. You could argue that the populists win, in which case the establishment Democrats have lost control and Trump will win because the people will choose a populist over the elitist. You could argue that AOC proves the leftward lurch, in which case Trump will never muster the support to win. And it may be that Joe Biden's lead is actually substantially better than Trump's, and it's real. NYT Upshot, Siena College poll. 50% in favor of Biden, 36 for Trump. There's another poll, I believe it was by the New York Times, showing that support for Black Lives Matter is up something like 28 points. Maybe Ilhan Omar was right. Maybe you've all already lost. Maybe it's defeatist to say so. But look, I think it's disgusting they would tear down our statues, destroy our history, rip apart the Constitution, violate free speech, abolish civil rights. That's just me. And I've thought about it for a long time. Yeah, maybe it's true. Trump lost the popular vote. He did. People liked Hillary Clinton. Maybe they love the idea of suspending free speech. I mean, the polls show that people like Black Lives Matter as they romp about tearing down statues and burning buildings to the ground and shooting at each other. Maybe that's what the people want. And you will find if that's the case, then it's almost like that book, I Am Legend. That's you. At one point, maybe you did represent the majority. But times changed. And the progressive woke mob started to advance. Younger people, even Gen Z, many of them are woke progressives. And maybe they've risen up and they've mocked and belittled you and they've abandoned your ideals. Maybe they no longer care about free speech. Maybe they just want to be told what to do by the goose-stepping communists. It's possible. You have to accept that as a reality. I'm not saying you have to accept it in the sense that give up all hope. I'm saying maybe it's true. These people have already won. Donald Trump's 36 to 50%. Some people would say, you're wrong, Tim. The polls were wrong in 2016. And I'm seeing a lot of progressives say it. I kid you not, progressives tweeting, they told us the same thing and I don't buy it. But the New York Times talks about why their polls are accurate and why they were still accurate in 2016. They talk, and you got to consider, when the New York Times said Hillary Clinton had like an 87% chance to win, they weren't saying the polls favored her that much. They were saying that Trump was down 3 percentage points in their poll. 3 percentage points. That's what they're saying in this article. June 23rd, 2020. Donald Trump was trailing Hillary by 3 points, and thus they concluded that based on all these different districts, Trump would not be able to win. It was extremely unlikely. But with that margin of error, Trump was able to win. They didn't take into consideration certain areas, but they have since updated their polling, and they're now suggesting we've done better. And even though we got, our odds favored Hillary, Trump still won. It doesn't mean we were wrong. Consider this. If Trump was trailing by 3 points, and I believe that's exactly what they say, 3 points nationwide. And it's not just them. Check it out. They say other high quality polls also performed solidly. Most national polls, for instance, fared very well, including the final New York Times CBS News survey that had Hillary Clinton ahead by 3 points nationwide, less than a percentage point from her final popular vote margin. When we analyzed our data after the election, we assessed that we were right for the right reasons, like showing Mr. Trump with a wide lead among white working class voters, and that there were opportunities to refine our approach. We reached a different conclusion than you might expect. If we could go back, we would have wanted more of our own polling in 2016, not less. In 2018, we conducted a greater number of political surveys. We had an average error of around 3 points over nearly 50 polls of House races over the final 3 weeks, with virtually no bias towards either party. Over the final 10 days, the average error was just over 2 points. Out of more than 400 pollsters, the Times Siena poll is one of 6 to earn an A+ rating from 538. Consider this. Donald Trump is down more than he was against Hillary in so many polls that there's no way he could actually win. This may be the case. And maybe you should also realize, with cultural institutions bending over backwards to Black Lives Matter, maybe it's over. The fight is over before it started. Perhaps that means there won't be a civil war. Perhaps that means that there is a tiny, tiny fraction of individuals who truly do believe in free speech and have any idea what's really going on. Or it's all wrong again. It could all be wrong. I honestly don't know. For a while, I was convinced Trump would landslide, but so was everybody else. I think it's really funny when these activists like to take the fact that I produce 4 hours of commentary every single day. You can find tons of videos for any reasons talking about certain issues in one way or another. And then they say, this proves Tim's wrong. This proves Tim wrong. So I recently said I thought AOC was going to win. Yesterday, the day before, the month before, I said I really do think AOC is going to win this one. But the framing was that she could lose. So I put up a video saying AOC is poised to lose. She could lose. Here's why. And there were good reasons to suggest it. Wall Street was dumping in money. We saw trends that moderates were winning. Like I mentioned, Matthew Iglesias said moderates win. You take those videos without watching them, and then you drop them right next to AOC's victory. And sure, you can make your point. But the reality is there were good reasons to believe these things at the time. Times change, however. We're now looking at something drastically different. I'd be willing to bet that the Democrats may have learned from some of their mistakes. I'd be willing to bet that the progressive youth are growing up and becoming more progressive. I'd be willing to bet that Joe Biden's hiding and being non-threatening is a huge advantage because people don't like Trump. I'd be willing to bet that support for Black Lives Matter really is up across the board. We can make every excuse that we want. We can say things like, people are scared to speak up because they'll be canceled. Perhaps. We can say things like, people are scared to tell the pollsters who they'll really vote for. I don't believe it, man. At this point, I think, I thought Trump was going to landslide because of the riots, because of the fear, but not so much. I'm not convinced. I think AOC's victory shows that the active members of the Democratic Party are clear in what they want. They want the lunacy. Whatever it is, the statues being torn down, they love it. regular people aren't getting active and aren't doing anything, so be it. And I don't think there's going to be enough Republicans to stand up to make a difference. That being said, I'm not saying to be defeatist. If you are a Democrat, if you're AOC, like I mentioned, congratulations, you've done it, you've won. If you're a conservative, it just means you better get every single person you know and every minute of the day, make every phone call possible. AOC took this election seriously. You know why? She was scared. I was right when I mentioned that yesterday. She looks worried. Even everybody's pointing this out, that she did not take this for granted, that she was desperately trying to make sure she crushed this primary, and she did. Now, what happens if Trump supporters become complacent? What happens if Trump supporters aren't calling as many people as possible, volunteering, getting out, advocating? You will lose. And everything is showing you, you are on track to lose. Now, of course, I've been wrong about a lot. I was making content about it, but back in 2016, I was convinced Hillary was going to win, and she didn't. I made a video about this in 2018. I thought Republicans would take the House. They didn't. And now I'll tell you what, I have no idea. The data is suggesting that Trump is going to lose, that the progressives are continuing to dominate. The Democratic establishment has fallen and is now under the control of the progressive mob. The critical race theory woke insanity is taking over. They've taken over the corporations. They've taken over mainstream television and video games, and now the Democratic Party. So I'll tell you what, man, it just looks like defeat as far as I can tell. What will the election prove? I honestly don't know. People haven't been standing up, so maybe that's it. The viral rant I had the other day, I think it's funny in this context. Me saying you need to stand up for yourself. The silent majority must be silent no longer. All that stuff. Maybe the reality is it's just over. Maybe it's not the silent majority. Maybe you're the silent minority because none of you could muster the strength to actually stand up for what you believed in 4 years ago. And now regular people are on the crazy train. I don't want to be defeatist. What I'm telling you should be lighting a fire under you. I'm not telling you to give up. I'm telling you that the fight ahead of you is the hardest fight you'll have faced in a long time. That Trump is not guaranteed to win. You can still win if you are a Republican. If you're a Democrat, you need to make sure you keep fighting as well. This is the point. As I mentioned with Ocasio Cortez's district, if every single Republican in NY14 voted, she'd lose. She'd lose by huge numbers too. But what's going to get Republicans to actually vote? Maybe it's this. Maybe it's being told that you are being crushed. Will finally get people to realize they have no choice, but you have to get out and vote. Maybe you have no choice. You must volunteer. You must speak up now or forever hold your peace. Maybe there are people who really do believe that there was a time when America was great and that we can return to those times. I think it was a time when, although there were really bad things in this country, we were making progress, that reform was happening, that was improving things. And now we're at a point where a violent mob is roaming through the streets, just destroying things and attacking politicians. So I seem to think now is not a great time, and we are not headed in the right direction, and we will not be headed for something great. Now is the time, I think, to warn people that you are on track to lose. I'm not talking about Trump. I'm talking about our civil liberties. Like in California, I'm talking about our constitutional rights. That's what scares me. I don't know what Biden will do if he gets elected, but I do know the left will be emboldened because they control the Democratic Party. This was the last great stand. This was the second most important election. Michelle Caruso Cabrera, the establishment Democratic candidate, the centrist, couldn't win. There was not enough people to stand up next to her and say, we'll defend this. We'll defend the idea of a regular American, of progress, of being moderate. Nope, AOC crushed it. She won. Michelle Caruso Cabrera couldn't even muster as many votes as Joe Crowley got in 2018. What does that say? The tides are changing. AOC is winning. And if you don't stand up for what you believe in, your ideas will be gone with it. Trump can't stop these statues from being torn down. Neither can the Democrats in Madison. So what comes next? I think it's obvious. We have this viral video of a Venezuelan woman saying they're changing names of streets. They're tearing down statues. They're banning movies. It's exactly what happened in Venezuela. So maybe we're already there. You better start getting active now. You better start making phone calls, volunteering, preaching, whatever it is you want to do, defending what you believe in, whatever it may be. Now, of course, this mostly is aimed at the Republicans who are on track to lose, for sure. But for me, it's not about Republican or Democrat. I've never been a big fan of Trump. For me, it's about civil rights and civil liberties and who would stand up for them. I guess we will see what happens as time goes on. As I always say, November is coming. The election is soon, nearly just about 4 months away. Stick around. The next segment will be up at youtube.com/timcastnews at 6 p.m. and I will see you all then.